we're trying something a little bit new. We're going to start doing some of these recordings in advance, especially over the summer, because we know that it's a beautiful day outside. It's patio season, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to be on the patio. But Jorian and I have been talking about all of the changes at CMHC. There's some new programs. He's got lots of information about that, and so I asked him if we could hop on and do a recording and talk a little bit about the new CMHC program. And so I'm super happy that Jorian was available today. He's, as you know, he's a great WREN supporter. He's an investor, and he is the Assistant Vice President at DLC Commercial. And so we're always happy to chat with him and hear his advice. And he does a lot of investing himself. And I don't know, Jorian, do you even know how many CMHC deals you've put together over the last few years? Do you keep count?
Yeah, we don't really keep count, but I bet you it's over 1,000.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And we're also testing out. Jorian's got this funky new system in his boardroom. So if you see the camera move, it's because he's got this new technology that we're taking for a test drive. And I said I can't wait to come and see how it works. So. Cool. So thanks for joining us today, Jorian.
Sure.
We've done this before. We've done this CMHC conversation quite a few times. We've mostly focused on the MLI Select program. But there's been a lot of changes everywhere in real estate over the last little while. And I know CMHC just made a whole bunch of changes. So I sent Jorian some questions, and we thought we'd work through some of those questions and see about some of the updates. So I guess we start off with, what are some of the changes that have happened to the existing programs? What do we need to know about with CMHC mortgage lending programs?
So yeah, there have been changes, some good, some bad. And CMHC lending programs, they follow a familiar arc. They're always launched with very little fanfare, and brokers like myself have to kind of figure it out as they go along. And then after 6 months or so, they're kind of discovered. And then they're adopted by developers, and then things go crazy. And once the boring public catches on, then CMHC is like a guy drinking from a fire hose, and they're trying to adapt. And then what they do is application volumes go way up, and CMHC has limited staff. And so what they do is they make it harder to qualify. And so MLI Select is no stranger to this. And it was launched a little over 2 years ago, and it was an answer to the RCFI program, which was a really fantastic program originally when it was launched. Got super busy. They changed the program, made it harder to qualify for. MLI Select came out and sort of took its place because it made it easier to qualify. Like RCFI, you really never really knew where you were at, if it was going to work or not. MLI Select, as long as the numbers work, which is what we do, like we figure out from a pro forma point of view, does it fit the program? And if it does, then you've got a done deal. And as it's on a point system. So 100 points gets you up to 95% of cost, gets you a 50-year amortization and a 1.1 debt service coverage ratio. And so all of those things, together make the deal really fantastic. Even though rates are high right now, it still made, deals that were, if there wasn't insured, made them doable.
Yeah, so, exactly. Well, a 50-year amortization, that's, pretty good.
Incredible.
I mean, really. It's better than pretty good. It's pretty incredible. And I think you probably know, I mean, you went through our not that you were involved in it because you were on sabbatical when we bought Crescent, so you were away. But
right.
But
you
with
guys had some struggles there.
Yeah, but with our Crescent mortgage, we've got ours in at 4.75%, which seems like a pretty reasonable rate right now compared to what some other people are paying. And I think that's on a 40-year amortization just because of the timing when we got in. But yeah,
right.
It makes it definitely more doable for sure.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah. So that program has changed. And so one thing that, and it's a pretty substantive change. So there's 3 criteria to the program, and one of them was energy efficiency. And so the BC Building Code, which is basically Step Code 3, dictated that if the building met that standard, it was energy efficient as far as CMHC was concerned. And so they would grant you 100 points just on energy efficiency. So you didn't have to do any affordability or accessibility, which are the two other criteria under MLI Select. And so what CMHC has done now is they've capped the number of points that you can get under energy efficiency at 50 rather than the 100. So what that means now is you have to include some affordable units in your building, whether you're buying something existing or you're constructing. And so, those numbers that CMHC says are affordable, they're 5 years old. They're from StatsCan. They were put together in 2019. And, over the last couple of years, rents have just gone crazy. And so those numbers are really out of date. And so what that does is it kind of saddles your building with a 10-year covenant that you're going to keep those rents at those, I think unrealistically low rates for a long time. So it lowers your cash flow, lowers your income, and it makes your building worth less actually during that time. So those are some of the negatives. And, people adapt, and we're going to adapt, and we're going to make the program work and that kind of thing. But I would say that's the biggest negative in MLI Select.
And so I would imagine that there's some provinces that it just doesn't make sense to invest in with MLI Select. Is that the case? Just because of costs and the associated costs surrounding that kind of thing?
That's right. Yeah. So I would say that BC in particular, where we are, cap rates have always been historically lower in BC anyways. It makes it that much more difficult. And so, so your leverage, if you're going to buy something, in the Lower Mainland, you're going to get 50% because that's all that, the building is going to be able to support. You're not going to get 95% of cost. There's just no way.
So if you can only get 50%, can you do a second mortgage yet? Like, have they added in the ability to do a second on a CMHC program, or no?
Yeah, you can do a second mortgage. The approval process is difficult in that eventually CMHC will want you to combine that second mortgage with the first. And so there's some cost to doing that. And not every lender wants to do that. So we don't do a lot of second mortgages behind CMHC firsts, just because the numbers don't really work.
But it's possible.
It is possible. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. It's not common though, I will say that.
I'm just thinking if you're only getting 50% financing and the rest of the numbers work, then maybe it's one of those things just worth investigating if it makes it work.
If it's worth doing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say on the positive side that
there's some positives. Let's hear
some positives.
Jorian.
Yeah. So back in May of 2020, CMHC said you can't do any refinances unless you're going to reinvest that money into another project, or you're going to build something, or you're going to buy something that's multifamily. So they've taken that requirement away. They've relaxed it, which is pretty nice because a lot of times, people will need a refinance on a piece of property to pay out investors, or they've got another place where that money came from, and they've got to repatriate those dollars. And so CMHC up until today, actually June 19th, they said we're not going to allow that, and that created some issues for some people, and so they're taking that away, which is quite nice.
That's actually really exciting news. So you can do a refinance. I'm going to get my head wrapped around this because this wasn't one of the things I was expecting to hear.
Okay, yeah, right. There you go.
It's exciting. Yeah. So let's say you have a 5-year CMHC mortgage. Can you refinance in that term time? Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, if you had an existing CMHC mortgage and there's room to refinance in your building, you could refinance. In the past, you could always do that anyway, but they wanted to know where the proceeds of funds were going. Mm-hmm. And so they've taken that requirement out. And so you can refinance a CMHC mortgage, no question. Okay. It was just that they were kind of trying to, track where the proceeds were going.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Cool. And I guess if you're going forward and you're building a bigger building, better building, then refinance makes sense anyway, because if you go like from a sixplex to a 12plex or something, like all of the changes that we're hearing about in BC with all of these, oh, you can now put a
Yep.
sixplex on your single family lot. I'm sure there's going to be some CMHC applicants coming out of that.
Absolutely, there will be that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you got it.
Okay, interesting. Cool. There's probably going to have to be a part 2 when we when we dive a little bit deeper into the CMHC, the actual reality of it, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've talked a little bit about some of the changes. Are there any new programs, Jorian? Like, oh, I know we focus a lot on MLI Select, and you say that that replaced the what was it? RCFI program?
RCFI program.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I used to know all the acronyms. And,
Yeah, there's lots, and this business is, it's an occupational hazard with
we like our
acronyms for sure.
Yeah. So, are there any
Yeah.
new programs that
There
we
is
know about?
there is a new co-op program that's geared to nonprofits. We haven't had an application in yet because of the nonprofit angle. Most of our clients are for profit, so we don't anticipate too many applications. And typically what happens is on newer programs, we typically don't really dig into them until we get an application for one of them. I do know that the nonprofit angle will make it likely unprofitable for somebody that wants to make a profit. And it's really only, it's geared to like maybe an Indigenous society or a women's center or something that has a community component to it that is not typically for profit. So we don't do that sort of business that much in our office, but that's the only new program that I know of at this point.
Interesting. I mean, it would definitely be interesting to look at that, from a cooperative perspective. Would it work for co-housing or co-living, or is it just a co-op, right? Because a co-op is that, that membership driven. You buy in, and then when you sell, you don't get the appreciation of your property. You usually buy in at a rate, and then you sell at the same rate, and people move in and out of the co-op that way.
That's right. Yeah, and typically those programs from CMHC will have some criteria or covenants on title that require it to stay nonprofit. And if it was sold for a profit, it would be difficult to kind of crystallize that value or make money on it. So CMHC's mandate is to provide inexpensive housing for Canadians, and so I think it fits more within that, and not really about what we're talking about, which is property development.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm curious if it would work for something like a retirement home. That would be interesting.
It might, yeah. And I know that you're going to ask me about other opportunities later about SROs, and we can get into that in a few minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Good stuff. So I think a couple of the other questions that I had, we definitely were talking about new builds seem to be getting the applications, and existing rentals, it seems to be taking longer. I mean, our Crescent property was a great example of that. It took a very long time. Whereas, I know there were quite a few of my colleagues who are building in Alberta in particular, and their whole application process was like 6 weeks to 6 to 12 weeks. Is that is that really happening, that some of the applications for new builds are happening that quickly?
Yeah, so you're talking about an application process through the city or through CMHC?
Through CMHC for new builds.
Yeah, for new builds, we did notice that that the amount of time for approval from application to approval has dropped significantly. And we just did one in Merritt, for instance, and that was only about 6 weeks from application to approval. Wow. And that used to be 4 months, that process. So it has significantly accelerated, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And so so with new builds getting the most attention, is it worth doing a mortgage or an application on an existing rental and buying a rental, or is that just maybe not the way to go anymore? No,
for sure. The majority of our business still is purchases, refinances, and to give you a short answer, cap rates are the key. And, if you can buy something at a 6 cap or better, it's likely going to work in the current rate environment with CMHC. We touched on this earlier. In Vancouver, cap rates are really low. They're in the 2 to 4% range. So you're only going to get 50% leverage, right? And that works for some people that have 50% down, but most people don't. And if you can find something in that 6% or better cap rate range, then it's definitely still works.
Okay. So that leads to the next question. In general, where are the best places to do these kinds of projects in Canada? I mean, there's got to be some developer friendly or developer friendlier provinces.
For sure.
In what
Yeah.
we're seeing.
Yeah, BC is not particularly developer friendly from an economic point of view because land costs are so high. But also municipal issues, make the timelines really long. Like in Vancouver, you're kind of 2 years from buying a property to get shovel ready, and most people don't have the horsepower to wait that long. We do most of our business in Western Canada, and we're seeing a lot of opportunity in Alberta and in smaller communities in BC. Like, some municipalities are very pro-development, and they just don't happen to be in the Lower Mainland, where the population is. We like BC and Alberta, BC small town, and the majority of Alberta is pretty good too. Red Deer, Edmonton and Calgary in particular, land prices are still cheap. So if you're going to build something and do a CMHC construction loan, that still really works well there. We like that a lot. And some of the maritime provinces, land is super cheap there, but rents are still pretty high. And so, so that makes for a good pro forma for sure.
Yeah. Darlene, our colleague out in Moncton, she's been talking about how the rents since COVID, with people discovering that they don't have to live in Toronto, and they, sold their expensive Toronto homes, moved out to places like Moncton and Halifax, and then bought a summer or a winter home in Florida and still had money left over. But
right.
With so many people moving to the East Coast, the rents have almost doubled. And so like the
right.
shock of people living on the East Coast has been, I mean, here on the West Coast, we're used to these outrageous rents. I mean, we're used to them. We're not happy about them.
Yep.
But we seem to know that we live in an area where rents are always going to be completely ridiculous.
You're right. Yeah.
And the East Coast they're getting used to rents being ridiculous, so they're still fresh to that whole idea. And so I mean, when Darlene talks about the land costs and the rent, it definitely seems that the East Coast would be a great place to be building. And with our immigration numbers being on track for still 500,000 people per year, if a lot of people are coming from Europe, and that whole kind of general area, it's generally a shorter flight if you're wanting to go back and visit family from the East Coast.
You're right. Yeah, and a lot of people that immigrate to Canada, they come through Toronto, mm-hmm. and they don't really know about the West Coast. My parents were the same. They arrived in the 50s in Toronto and decided on a lark to take the train out to BC, and I'm happy they did that. But lots of people don't know that, and so there's lots of pressure on the East Coast and in Toronto and Ontario in general.
Yeah. So you mentioned that if you're getting started, and you want to do something with CMHC Select, where is a good place to start? I mean, a couple of years ago, I was looking at Campbell River. People talk about Powell River. Vernon. I mean, there's so many. So you said you like some of these small communities in BC. Are there like a top 3 communities in BC that you'd recommend?
Well, like I was saying earlier, we got a deal approved just recently in Merritt, and I tried to get a deal approved there through our CFI about 2 years ago. And at that time, I think there were only about 350 rental units in total in Merritt. And so CMHC said, sure, your numbers work and everything, but we are not prioritizing Merritt. But under MLI Select, we got this deal approved, and we're actually just right now trying to get it funded, and we're just closing it with a lender. But Merritt is a classic case of maybe an area that people will overlook. There's not really too much to it. It's the confluence of, a couple of highways, they've got a couple of big box stores there, that kind of thing. I like Merritt. I probably wouldn't look there now because I think there's a bunch of new projects coming out of the ground there. Might be harder to get it done, but there's other places like Penticton, Princeton, Vernon. If you were going to stay in BC, that work. Prince George, Quesnel, Terrace. These places all work, because the resulting cap rate is going to be 6+, and that really helps your cash flow, and land is cheap. One thing you got to keep in mind is when you get into one of these projects, you're going to have to buy the land typically with private money, because CMHC will not entertain an application until you have your development permit in hand. And so at that point, you already own the land, you've done all your architectural, you've kind of fleshed out all the numbers, figured it out, and you're going to need some dough to get there. So unless you paid cash for the land, you're going to need some mortgage financing, and typically land financing falls in about the 50% leverage ratio, and so you'd need some cash to get going there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Vernon, Penticton, Prince George, Terrace, Merritt.
Yep.
Yeah, those sound interesting, right? I mean, it's good to hear that there's still places that you can at least make it work in BC, because there are definitely people who want to do something in the province, but are just like,
Yep.
where, how do you do anything in BC? It's so expensive. So yeah, it's good to know
Yep.
that there's still some places where there is some affordability. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in Penticton? It's a beautiful spot, and yeah, rentals. I can imagine that there would be a shortage of rentals in a
Yep.
place like Penticton.
It's a great spot, like you say. And another thing that people might consider as well is one of the least risky parts of property development is doing a land assembly, and I've done several myself. And it sort of takes the risk out of it, because if you can get a couple of properties together, assemble them into one title, rezone, get it shovel ready, there's lots of money to be made just selling the dirt once it's shovel ready, and you take out that construction risk. And lots of people don't really have the bandwidth to get through construction, because there's lots of delays, there's cost overruns, there's inflation, supplier issues, all those things kind of conspire to make construction very difficult. So you don't necessarily even have to borrow money to build. You could do an assembly and make some money that way.
Yeah, exactly. And we're actually we're talking about a couple of different assembly options here in Victoria at the moment. Long term, but there are a couple of, again, especially with the new density requirements, and because Victoria wants 6 plexes, and they've made that very clear, and of course the BC government wants six plexes plus.
Yep.
There are a few really interesting locations where there's a few of the neighbors that are starting to get together and have chats, but it's a longer play. But yeah, I mean, full block land assembly in Victoria is the kind of conversation that people are having, so that's quite interesting. So
Right.
yeah, very interesting. Yeah, and we know lots of people who have done very well on the land assembly, so it's always interesting to follow that up as well. Cool. Okay, so if we're talking about CMHC in particular, and we're talking about, again, maybe someone's doing their first deal with a partner who's done this kind of thing before, realistically, what's the minimum investment that someone needs to be ready to make to get in on let's say, a starter CMHC deal?
Well, I assume we're talking about construction. And if that's the case, CMHC loans under 5 million are getting very hard to place. And so, for instance, I've got one client that bought 2 properties in Calgary last year, and one's worth about $2 million, the other one's worth about $3 million. And I had no lenders that wanted to do those deals, and because we wanted to do them through CMHC, because there was a prohibition that CMHC had put into place last year where they wouldn't take out financing from private companies or non-approved lenders, which means that if you bought something, like say you bought an apartment building like my client did, and it was a non-approved lender, and in this case it was a MIC, they had to refinance it twice. So they had to take it to an approved lender, have them refinance it, and then have that approved lender then go to CMHC. So that, as of, I believe it's today, that hurdle has been removed. But it's still tough to get deals approved, especially on the construction side at 5 million or less. And so I think there's only one lender that I know of that will do construction of 5 million or less, but I think they're starting to tighten up too. So on the construction side, you need a fair amount of cash to get involved. But if you're going to do CMHC just for purchase, there are lenders that will still do a minimum loan amount of $1.5 million. So your purchase price is going to be $1.8 million or something like that. You could probably get $1.5 million leverage. But there's a bit of a void in the market. One of the other things that CMHC just did recently is they are going to curtail the correspondent program. And what that means is, like, DLC Commercial is a correspondent to CMHC. So that means that we have the right to approach CMHC to get the certificate of insurance from CMHC. And we get that right from a lender. So a lender has done a lot of business with our brokerage and said, hey, we like the way that you package deals. We like your due diligence. So we're going to give you our stamp of approval to approach CMHC on our behalf. But what's happened in the last couple of years, there's a couple of lenders that were giving out correspondent status to brokers that really didn't know what they're doing. And so those brokers were submitting applications that were maybe incomplete, or there, not enough information, or some of the information was just wrong. And so CMHC, rather than do an audit and figure out, which brokers know what they're doing, they've just said, hey, we're going to cut the program. And so what that means is that we now have to find a workaround to be able to submit our applications to CMHC without using a lender. And I think what's going to happen in the next couple of months, people are kind of, in limbo right now because we're not really sure which way this is going to go. And but what it means is that a lender now is going to have to hire more people to do CMHC deals because they have to do our job, on our client's behalf. Because we can't go to CMHC first to get the insurance certificate. They have to do it on our behalf. And so they're going to have to ramp up, hire more analysts, hire people that know CMHC. And many institutions actually don't really know what they're doing. We do CMHC underwriting for 2 or 3 institutions that have said, hey, Jorian, we need your help because we don't know how to do these deals. And so what's going to happen now is, because we can't package these deals and go to CMHC, they're going to have to do it. And if they don't know what they're doing, they're not going to do the deals. And so what's going to happen, there's going to be a bit of a vacuum here in CMHC until we figure out a workaround. So I don't want to sound negative, but that's kind of what's happening. Yeah,
so it's going to be more paperwork, more bureaucracy, more people who are new on the tools, trying to figure out how to drive them. Yeah. We've definitely
and more cost.
And of course that adds cost. That adds cost to everything, right? Because it's your time cost, your all of the costs. The costs just seem to go up. So that seems like kind of a bad decision. I mean, maybe they just needed to vet the
brokers that had the
brokers.
Stats. I agree. I think it's it's just another case of, I think CMHC is understaffed and they have a problem, and rather than try to figure out an intelligent way to do it, they just cut it off and let the chips fall where they may. So I don't know how that helps CMHC's mandate of providing more housing. I just don't. I think it's short-sighted.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see over the next couple months. And while you were talking about that, I wrote down the word limbo, because that seems to be describing a lot of things about where we are these days, right? Like a lot of people, with interest rates and with elections coming up, and and we've got elections in BC, the U.S. election. I'm looking at buying a property in Mexico, and there was just an election in Mexico. And everybody limbo seems to be a key word right now. It's like we're all in limbo. We're just waiting. We don't quite know what we're waiting for. Waiting for opportunity, waiting for rates to go down, waiting for a change of government, waiting for policies. waiting for some kind of new world order. It's just, it's a really interesting time.
You're right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So limbo is a good word for it. So with all of these changes with CMHC, are there other programs that work in conjunction with CMHC? Like if it's more difficult to do something under 5 million, like would you maybe partner with someone like BC Housing, or is there like an overlap of organizations that you can partner with to
Not really.
do a deal, or no, you just go the CMHC route, do your private lending to buy your land, go your CMHC route, and know that if you're looking at let's say a $1.8 million building, you might get 1.5 million, so you may only have to come up with 300,000 of your own money. But if you're doing a $5 million bigger land purchase and development, then you're going to need a lot more of your own capital injected into that.
Yeah, there's CMHC still, I think, is the best game in town. If you were to do it conventionally without CMHC, you're paying about 2% more for the money, and you also don't get the amortization that you do under CMHC. So I know we kind of went, took a left turn in the negative down there, but CMHC still got a lot going for it, and so every deal should be studied on its own merits. But there's definitely some changes that are affecting the way that we do business. But CMHC is still viable. You just have to be prepared to maybe up the size of your project so that lenders will do the deal. Especially on construction. I don't know who's going to do under 5 million on construction. If you're buying an existing project, look for something that's $1.5 million or more on the mortgage side. So it would have to be a $2 million plus purchase, roughly, to make it work.
Okay. And so do they still fund like the small, because I think at one point it was CMHC, a rental would be, if it was 5 units or more, it qualified. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so their regulation is five doors or more and $1 million. And that's great. Then so let's say that we find one of these, we get a certificate of insurance. Getting it funded is the problem, because many lenders are saying, you know what, it's the same amount of work to do $1 million as it is to do 10. Yeah. So we're going to go for the lower hanging fruit and do the $10 million deal, and thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, interesting. Okay. What are the key things that CMHC looks for from its applicants? I mean, that's obviously going to be an important thing. A lot of people don't realize that in CMHC they're looking more at the deal, but maybe that maybe has changed as well. So what are they? If I'm applying for a CMHC loan, what's going to get me more? What's going to more likely get me into the program?
Sure. Yeah. So CMHC is primarily interested in two things, and one is experience, the other one's liquidity. And so when you're going to do a construction deal, for instance, they are looking for a qualified general contractor that knows what he's doing, that has built something that's comparable to what you're proposing, and they want you to have 25% of the mortgage amount in net worth. So let's say your mortgage amount's $10 million. They're going to want you to have $2.5 million in assets outside of the project in net worth. And that doesn't have to be liquid. It could be, equity in your house, could be, TFSA money or a stock portfolio or cash, those sorts of things. The other thing they look for is on the takeout, once the building is finished and you're renting it up, that you have relevant experience in running a building of that size. And if you don't, that's fine. You would have to hire a third-party management to run the building. And that's not hard to find. We're just doing a deal up in Courtenay, and they were originally thinking of renting it themselves. I said, probably they're not going to allow that. They actually hired a third-party manager, and the third-party manager managed to get much higher rents than they thought that they would get on their own. So they really paid for themselves, having the third-party management in there. The other thing I'll mention is on the construction piece, we have lots of construction loans at any given time in our office here, and every one of them, since post-COVID, is over budget. They all have cost overruns. And so even if your budget gets approved and you have a contingency fund with, let's say, $500,000 in it, it's a good idea to double that contingency because you're going to need it. You're probably going to get it back, and if you don't use it, then so much the better. But it's better to have money in advance than to scramble trying to find it and having a cost overrun and having your project shut down, because that can be the kiss of death on a new project.
Yeah, and that seems to be, I mean, I don't know if it's happening a lot with CMHC projects, but we're definitely hearing lots of developers saying, yeah, I was gonna break ground here, but I'm not going to for a while now. So
you're right. Lots of people are waiting.
Sitting around. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So one of the other things that I was curious about, you know, we've talked a lot about how Alberta really seems to be on fire. Is it going to max out? Like, have we missed the opportunity to get in on, you know, the gold rush, shall we say, with all of the, I mean, Edmonton's being called one of the fastest growing cities in North America right now. There seems to be, you know, there was, I think, something in the news yesterday that said they're on track to exceed their required housing targets. And I'm curious if people are, is it going to be too late to invest in Edmonton or Alberta?
I don't think so. You know, I did hear something about housing starts being way up, and but how housing starts are calculated is by building permits, and a lot of permits that are out there are not actually finished. Like a lot of them are permits for a project that might be 24 condos, and then the developer decides, you know what, the climate's not right, I can't get my pre-sales, you know, the numbers aren't there, so I'm not going to go ahead. And so I think that that number is a bit of a misnomer, and it's a bit distracting, because you really ought to look at, you know, completed stock. And from our perspective, there's lots of existing projects where you know, people are buying buildings that are maybe have been neglected. There's some deferred maintenance, or the rents are under market. They you know, Alberta doesn't have the RTO like we do, and so you can move your rents up to market. So we think there's lots of opportunity still on that side, because there's lots of rental stock out there where you know, the owners owned it for a long time. He's put it up for sale because they're retiring, or they're getting older, or they don't want the hassle. And we have lots of clients that have bought there, and in a short period of time brought the rents up to market, and brought that cap rate from 8 down to 4. And this client I was telling you about in Calgary did that exact same thing. Over 12 months in one of his buildings, he increased the rents by 60% in 1 year.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's an aggressive guy and did really well, and so those opportunities still exist. On the construction side, land's cheap in Edmonton and rents are high, so that's a good formula for construction. Yeah. So lots of opportunity there.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. So I think that was most of the questions that I had, Jorian. Anything else that you want to add? I've got a bonus question.
Sure.
You know, and it's one of the things that, you know, a lot of people, and again, it comes down to that whole limbo piece, right? And I know you're a real estate guy, and you've said this many times, you know, you've got most of your investments in real estate. Is real estate investing still a good idea for Canadians?
I think so. I'm all in real estate, and you know, I've got a buddy that's a financial planner, and for the last 30 years, he's been trying to get me to take money off the table and out of real estate. And, you know, I never do that. I've always continually proved him wrong. And I'm bullish on real estate, and, you know, I have to be, because I'm 100% in, but I keep waiting for, you know, for this crash or correction, you know, and it just never seems to happen. You know, there's no substitute for due diligence and being smart, but you know, there's a lot to be said for, you know, going for it, and you know, if you've done your due diligence and, you know, you figured it out, go ahead and roll the dice, give it a try. There's lots of opportunity.
Awesome, good to hear. And I think, you know, one of the things in particular where a lot of us still feel the opportunity is in the multifamily, right? Like
it's going out and buying
a one-door condo or a single family home especially in a place like BC where the cost is so high, and if you've got bad tenants, well, you're never going to be able to get rid of them. The risk to me of buying one door, you can't Airbnb it. I mean, there's so many things you can't do anymore, but with multifamily, you're hedging your bets, you're giving yourselves more opportunity, you're using economies of scale. I mean, I talk a lot about our Crescent apartment building as an example, and I say, look, if you were going to go and buy something equivalent to getting a one bedroom unit in an apartment building across the street from the beach, first of all, you wouldn't own the land like we own the land here because we bought the building. We don't have strata because right now it is a rental building, so we don't have strata fees. And you wouldn't be able to buy something for $400,000 a door, right? So where would you be able to do that? And so that, to me, like that whole economies of scale just seems to be, if you're going to do real estate, private equity, private lending, economies of scale, multifamily. I've been talking to you about buying a little boutique hotel in Mexico. Those all seem to make sense, but I don't know if I'd be going out and buying a single family home or a condo.
Yeah, I agree. We have lots of people that started that way and then they figure it out and they transition into multifamily. Lots of people have 5 or 6 doors, and that means you got 5 roofs to pay for, 5 sets of property taxes, 5 hot water heaters that are going to break down in the middle of the night. And, you do one apartment building and, like you say, economies of scale really, really matter. Yeah. And even if you squeak in there and maybe pay a little bit more than you'd like, eventually inflation's going to take care of you. If you're patient, real estate's the long game. If you're going to speculate, you could get hurt, but if you're patient, you're going to get rewarded.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the lessons that we've all learned over, especially over this last 4 or 5 years, right? We had lots of people who, in the heat of it, they were making money on flips, right? And they got lucky. They got in at the right time. They bought high, they sold higher, right? Yep. And so then there were the group of people who bought high and everything changed, and now they're stuck with something that they don't want. Right. So, yeah, and I think the kind of thing to finish on for us in particular is, obviously with WREN, we're a lot about collaboration and community. And so to us, again, using economies of scale, buying multifamily, it makes sense because a lot of times it's done in partnerships. Right. People forget that a lot of people who make their money in real estate investing, they're not going out and buying and building buildings on their own. A lot of people have partners. I'm sure you have partners. You probably have many partners for many different deals.
I do.
And that's that's a key part is you get you've got a pie and you can have a piece of the pie. And sometimes it's an easier way to get in to have a piece of the pie than trying to figure out how to bake a pie right from the very beginning, right?
For sure. I love partnerships. I've had many, and I'd rather have a piece of something than 100% of nothing. And, if I have a problem with one of my partnerships, then the solution is a 50-cent dollar, instead of me paying for the whole thing because I have a partner. And it's no fun being alone. It's fun having a group of people doing something. So I love partnerships. I recommend them.
Awesome. Love it. Cool. That's fantastic, Jorian. That's super helpful. Gives us a lot of information on CMHC and also just a lot of general information about kind of where we are, what provinces we still like, where the opportunities still are. And you're definitely still bullish on real estate. So
I am.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people out there who are just wondering, limbo. I think that's a key word that we're using right now. And I feel like people are probably still going to be a little bit in limbo for a while, but I'm kind of getting the sense from the rumblings that I'm hearing that, fall is when people are going to maybe start coming out of summer mode and shaking things off again and saying, okay, I feel like it's time to step back in. So we'll see.
I agree.
We'll see what happens. Cool. Awesome. Great.
All right.
Thanks, Jorian. Super helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us today.